Imagine, just imagine thinking death is the end, that there's nothing after this life, just blackness, no soul, no spirit, no God. That's exactly what Nancy Rynes believed, a scientist, a skeptic, an atheist who was terrified of death. But then everything changed. She was hit by an SUV while riding her bike. Her body was crushed. Her heart stopped. And what happened next shocked her to her core. And in her own words, this is the moment she realised she wasn't dead. She was being welcomed back.
I asked the question in my mind, I wonder if I'm dead. And if I am, how come I'm here? Because I don't believe in any of this stuff. If anything, I expected to go to the fiery depths, which is what I was taught in grade school, because I was going to burn in hell because I was an atheist. And so I asked that question, why am I here? I don't believe in you. And there was this resounding answer deep inside of me, who I guess would be the divine, I call it the divine presence or the God. You're my child. I'm welcoming you back home. This is where you belong. This is your home. And I just lost it. It felt like I wept for days because I was accepted. And then after I stopped crying, I thought, well, this is great. I can die now. I don't want to leave here.
But to truly understand the power of that moment, we have to go back to a little girl growing up on a farm in the Midwest. A girl who once believed, then walked away from it all. This is the true story of an atheist who went to heaven. Nancy Rynes grew up on a farm just outside of Chicago. As a child, she felt deeply connected to something greater. She'd tell her parents, God's in the trees, spirit is everywhere. But her Catholic upbringing eventually clashed with the real world. After scandals in the church surfaced, she started to question everything she'd been taught. By her late teens, she'd lost her faith completely. As an adult, Nancy became a scientist, logical, rational, grounded in facts. She didn't just drift away from faith, she became a full-blown skeptic, an unapologetic atheist. She believed the soul didn't survive death, because there was no soul, no God, no heaven, no afterlife. But underneath all that certainty was fear. Not fear of pain, not fear of suffering, but something far worse to her, the fear of nothingness, the fear that when she died, she'd simply stop existing. Here's a short audio clip from Nancy Rynes herself.
I had that science background, and so I didn't see any real hard evidence for anything else. So I just became the skeptic like pretty much every other scientist becomes, or even, well, a lot of people. You don't have to be a scientist to be a skeptic. Yeah, I was terrified because I thought that nothing I thought it was it. That was it. Everything ceased. Not just the body, but the consciousness too. And it was that part that terrified me because I just couldn't imagine nothingness.
That fear stayed with her for years, until one winter morning in Colorado when everything she thought was true shattered. It was a warm January morning in Colorado, unusually warm for winter. Nancy had taken the day off and went for a short bike ride through her quiet neighborhood. The sun was out, the streets were calm. It felt like a peaceful, ordinary day. But as she approached a roundabout, everything changed. A large SUV was coming in from the right. Nancy slowed down, thinking the driver was going to stop, but the driver didn't stop. She didn't even look up. She was texting. The woman behind the wheel never saw Nancy. In a split second, she struck her. Nancy was thrown onto the hood, looking in through the windshield. But the driver still didn't see her. She kept going, still looking at her phone. Nancy slipped down the front of the SUV, hit the pavement, and was dragged underneath the vehicle. Here's Nancy, in her own words, describing what happened.
And it turns out I slipped and hit the pavement, and then she kind of ran over me. Luckily, I was in between her wheels, but then my sternum got caught on the transfer case on a piece of her vehicle underneath of her car, underneath of her SUV. So I was being dragged underneath of her truck or her SUV. She had not a clue that she had just hit somebody. And so I'm caught underneath of her car, underneath of her SUV, and actually I reached up to hang onto her axle because she was in a turn in the roundabout, and if I would have let go, or if the transfer case had let go of me, I would have been run over by her rear wheels.
That moment should have ended her life, but instead it led her somewhere she never imagined, because while her body was under the SUV, something else was happening.
I noticed something really weird happened. And I started seeing, I experienced, I guess, what I call a dual consciousness state, where one part of my body, or one part of my consciousness moved out in front, outside of the entire accident scene, and watched the whole thing happen from out in front. And I could see the bystanders coming up, trying to stop her from driving. I could see her driving. I could see the whole thing happening from out in a different perspective. And at the same time, I was under the car, basically fighting for my life. Now, what was interesting in hindsight is those two parts of my consciousness were very, very different. And the one that was outside watching, the watcher, me, or the observer, was very calm and I call her the very spiritual one. She was out there kind of with her hands crossed, standing and looking, and she said, "This is really sad, but this is happening all as it should be, and everything will be okay." And then the part of me that was underneath the car was like, "Oh my God, this isn't going to be okay." I'm hurting down here. I'm terrified. But the two parts of my consciousness were so distinct. And that watcher me, I believe, really was my higher self, or my soul, that had started to leave. And then, the human level consciousness was still operating, but at a very primal level underneath that truck.
Nancy was experiencing something she had never imagined possible. It was as if her awareness had split in two. One part of her, the physical Nancy, was still under the SUV in pain and panic, but the other part was above it all, watching, calm, peaceful. She called that part the watcher. And even though it made no sense to her logical scientific mind, that higher self, that watcher, seemed to know something her human brain didn't. It wasn't afraid. It knew. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far greater. Somehow, Nancy held on. The SUV finally came to a stop. Thanks to a stranger who saw what was happening and blocked the vehicle with his own, Nancy began to crawl out from under the car, unaware of just how broken her body truly was. That's when a woman appeared, a trauma nurse who just happened to be nearby. She told Nancy not to move. And it's a good thing she did, because if Nancy had stood up, her spine could have snapped in multiple places. The nurse may have saved her life and her ability to walk. But something strange happened. No one else saw the nurse. Nancy was rushed to the trauma centre. Over 24 bones were broken. Her spine, her pelvis, her ribs, everything was damaged. She was placed in intensive care and scheduled for emergency surgery a few days later. And as the hours passed, her fear of death only grew stronger. What would happen when the lights went out? Would it really just be nothing? Nancy had no idea that her biggest fear was about to become the most extraordinary experience of her life. Here's a short audio clip from Nancy Rynes herself describing what happened when she was put under for surgery and woke up somewhere else.
They prepped me and, gave me the anesthesia, which is the same anesthesia I've had before. And off I went, and I woke up thinking, oh my God, where am I? I was standing on this beautiful meadow, like a hill, rolling hills, looking out across many, many, many layers of hills and mountains in the distance. And it was kind of misty and pearly, and there was just this beautiful sparkliness to it. Like a like everything had energy vibrating underneath of its surface. And then I realized, oh, wow, I don't want to leave here, because I was all of a sudden just surrounded and hit by this wave of pure love, pure, unconditional, welcoming love on a scale that I can't describe it. Oh man, it was all-encompassing peace and love and joy, really, that I was there.
Nancy had just been told something that shattered everything she believed, that she was loved, accepted, and somehow this place, not Earth, was actually her true home. She felt ready to stay forever. But someone had other plans. Out of the mist, a woman appeared, not a doctor, not a nurse, but a presence, a soul. Nancy never saw her face clearly because it wasn't about what the guide looked like. It was about what she came to teach. Here's Nancy describing that moment in her own voice.
Then a woman approached me, kind of fading in out of the mist. And she came up and she said, I'm your teacher. I'm going to be with you and teach you what you need to know in order to continue on. And I thought, oh, good, I get to die for real, and I get to go see my dad and my sister. You're going to be going back. You had agreed to do this already before you were born into this life. And I said, I don't remember agreeing to that. and I was shown this image of me. It was metaphorical, but kind of metaphorically signing a contract stating what I would do, that I would come here and talk about this stuff to others, to have this experience and to talk about it with others.
Nancy had been shown the truth about her soul, that she was loved, that she was more than her body, that she had chosen this life and this experience, but now it was time to see what she had done with that life. Her guide led her to a peaceful mountain pond, still and glassy. Nancy was asked to kneel beside it and touch the surface. What she saw changed everything. Here's Nancy, in her own words, describing the moment her life review began.
Basically, I was brought to this pond and was shown images of all the people that I had impacted in my life, both good and bad, or positive and negative, however you want to look at it. And I was allowed to touch the pond and realized that my action, like touching the pond, would affect all those people whose images were kind of superimposed on the pond. So it was a very strong visual of your actions affect more than just you. Your actions travel outward from you as ripples on a pond travel outward from that source. But then I was shown both good and bad from some of the things that I had done in my life, positive and negative. I'd made some poor choices in my younger years, and I got to see the impact of those choices on other people from their perspectives. So not from my perspective, but I got to see inside of their minds and hearts as to how I impacted them, either positively or negatively. And holy cow, what an eye-opener. I became instantly more aware of my actions in every moment that I'm here on Earth.
It wasn't just like watching a movie of her life. Nancy relived moments, not just from her point of view, but from the perspective of the people she had affected. When she had been kind, she felt the joy and hope it gave others. When she had been cruel, she felt their pain, not in theory, but as if it were her own. She saw one memory from her teenage years, a fight with her younger sister. She remembered saying something harsh and brushing it off, but here she felt her sister's hurt, the deep emotional wound it left, and how it affected her for years afterward. That single moment broke Nancy. The message was clear. Every word matters. Every action matters. Even the small ones. She wasn't being judged. She wasn't being punished. But she was being shown the truth so she could go back and live differently. Nancy didn't want to leave. After everything she had felt, everything she had remembered, she wanted to stay, but her guide told her, gently but firmly, it's time to go. Before she left, her guide placed hands on the parts of Nancy's body that were most injured. Her ribs, her collarbone, her sternum. She told Nancy it was a kind of spiritual healing to help ease the pain when she returned. And then it happened. Nancy opened her eyes. She was back in her body, back in pain, back in the hospital, back on Earth. And she was furious. Here's Nancy describing what happened in her own words.
When I woke up in the recovery room, I was screaming and crying. And when I came back into my body, sure enough, I mean, I've had pain from the surgery site and from in my lower back where they, bolted titanium rods into my back. My shoulder, my collarbone didn't hurt, and my ribs never hurt. My pelvis never hurt, and my sternum never hurt. And those were the areas that she worked on before she sent me back. So I had really no pain in those areas. And the doctors were astounded at my recovery. It was so fast.
Nancy's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. Doctors said she'd be in a body cast for 4 months. She was out in just 4 weeks. Her pain levels dropped. Her body healed faster than expected. And as her body healed, she began writing everything down, the places she had seen, the lessons that she was taught, and the truths that changed her forever. That writing became her book. Awakenings from the Light 12 Life Lessons from a Near-Death Experience, a powerful, heartfelt guide for anyone searching for deeper meaning or wondering if there really is something more. Nancy was once a skeptic, an atheist, afraid of dying. Now she lives with peace, with purpose, and with the deep knowing that life doesn't end when the body does. If this story touched you, if it gave you comfort, hope, or even just curiosity, please like this video so others can find it too. And if you're on your own spiritual journey or want to hear more stories like this, subscribe and join us, because here you're not alone. You're part of something bigger, a growing community of people remembering there's more to life and love than what we see.